Sophia Whitmore ripped the jet keys off her assistant's clipboard and hurled them across the hangar floor. They skidded to a stop at the boots of a grease-covered mechanic. "You want to be a man in this building?" She snapped, her voice echoing off the steel walls. "Then fly my jet right now, or get out of my way." Every executive around her laughed. They expected the mechanic to shrink. Instead, he bent down, picked up the keys, and looked her dead in the eye. What none of them knew was that this quiet man in dirty coveralls had once flown aircraft so classified the Air Force denied they existed, and he was about to remind the entire world exactly who he was. Before we go further, drop the name of the city you're watching from in the comments, so I can see how far this story travels. And if you believe a man's worth isn't measured by the clothes on his back, subscribe to the channel, and stay with me all the way to the end. The alarm went off at 4:30 in the morning, the way it had every single day for the last 6 years. Adrian Cole didn't hit snooze. He never did. He reached over, shut it off before the second beep, and sat up in the dark so he wouldn't wake the little girl sleeping in the room across the hall. His feet found the cold floor. His hands found his knees. And for one long moment, the way he did every morning, he just sat there and reminded himself of the promise. Show up, no matter what. Just show up. He stood and his back cracked in 3 places, and he almost laughed at himself. 42 years old and his body sounded like an old airplane on a cold start. He made the coffee first. Then he made the lunch. Peanut butter crusts cut off apple slices in a small bag because Emma liked them better than a whole apple. A note tucked under the sandwich. He wrote her a note every day. Some days it was a joke. Some days it was a fact about airplanes she'd never heard. Today it just said, "You are braver than you think." Dad. He was buttoning his coveralls when the small voice came from the hallway. "You're up early again." Adrian turned around. Emma stood in the doorway in her pajamas, hair a mess, one sock on. 8 years old and already sharp enough to notice everything. "I'm always up early, sweetheart," he said. "You're up late, that's the difference." "I couldn't sleep." She rubbed her eye. "Dad, is it true that airplanes can fly with only one engine?" He crouched down so they were eye to eye. "Where'd you hear that?" "The book, the one we read." "It's true," he said. "A good airplane can fly on one engine. A good pilot can bring it home on one engine." He tapped the tip of her nose. "You know why?" "Why?" "Because the airplane doesn't panic, and neither does the person flying it." She smiled at that, the gap where her front tooth used to be showing plain. He'd never told her that he knew this, not from a book, but from a night over the Nevada desert, when an engine had blown apart at 40,000 feet, and he'd brought a $30 million aircraft down to the runway with his own 2 hands and a heartbeat that never once climbed above steady. He'd never told her any of it, and he didn't plan to. "Go back to bed," he said, standing. "Mrs. Alvarez is coming at 7 to take you to school. I'll be home by 6. "You promise?" "I promise." She wrapped her arms around his leg quick the way kids do, and then she was gone back down the hall. Adrian stood in the kitchen and listened to her door close, and he felt the thing he felt every morning, that strange, aching gratitude that he still had someone to make lunches for. 3 years ago, he'd buried his wife. And on the worst day of his life, standing in a black suit that didn't fit anymore, he'd made himself a rule. Emma would never lose 2 parents. She'd lost her mother. She would never not for one single day lose her father. Whatever it took, whatever he had to give up. And he'd given up plenty. The airfield sat 40 minutes outside Seattle, a private aviation complex where the very rich kept their very expensive toys. Adrian pulled into the maintenance lot at 5:40, parked his 15-year-old truck between 2 rows of luxury SUVs, and walked into the hangar where he'd worked for the last 4 years. Cole. Danny Reyes tossed him a rag from across the shop floor. Danny was 26, all mouth and no filter, and Adrian liked him the way you like a stray dog that keeps showing up. "You see the schedule? Whitmore's bird is on the board for a hot turn. That's the boss's boss. The actual boss." "I saw it." "You ever met her?" "No. Word is she chews people up and spits 'em out before lunch. Danny leaned on a toolbox. My cousin worked catering for one of her events. Said she made a waiter cry. Sounds like a real charmer, Adrian said, already pulling the maintenance log for the Gulfstream in Bay 2. You're not even a little nervous. Adrian looked up. Danny, I've been nervous exactly one time in my adult life, and it wasn't over a CEO. When was it? Adrian went back to the log. Doesn't matter. It had been a hospital hallway, a doctor with a clipboard, and a face that told him everything before the words came out. That was the only time Adrian Cole had ever been afraid. Everything since had just been work. The morning went the way mornings went. He crawled under a citation and checked a hydraulic line that a younger tech had signed off on, but that Adrian didn't trust. He was right not to trust it. He found a weep at the fitting no bigger than a bead of sweat, the kind of thing that meant nothing today and could mean everything at 35,000 feet next Tuesday. He fixed it. He didn't make a big deal about it. That was the job. The whole job really finding the small thing before it became the big thing. Nobody ever thanked him for the crashes that didn't happen. Around 10, the supervisor, a heavy-set man named Bill Kessler, came through the shop with a clipboard and a scowl. Cole, you buttoned up the citation. Found a weep at the number 2 hydraulic fitting. Fixed it. It's in the log. Bill grunted. Nobody signed off on extra hours for that. It wasn't extra hours, Bill. It was the fitting being wrong. Just don't go making work for yourself. Bill flipped a page. The Whitmore Gulfstream's coming in hot at 11:30. She's got some big government thing. In and out. You're on it. Try not to talk to anybody important. Adrian let that one go. He'd learned a long time ago which fights were worth having, and which ones just wore a man down. He wiped his hands, checked his watch, and thought about the fact that in 8 hours he'd be home reading to his daughter, and that made everything else small. He had no idea that in 90 minutes, the sky he'd walked away from was going to walk right back into his life. The Gulfstream touched down at 11:34 and taxied to the private terminal like it owned the place, which Adrian supposed it did. The convoy of black cars was already waiting. Sophia Whitmore stepped out of the lead vehicle before it had fully stopped moving. She was tall, sharp-featured, dressed in a suit that probably cost more than Adrian's truck. She moved the way people move when they have never once in their life had to wait for anything, and she was already talking into a phone in a tone that made the 2 assistants trailing her flinch. I don't care what the FAA scheduler says, she was saying. I have a meeting with 3 senators and a deputy secretary of defense in Portland in 4 hours, and I am not sending an email that says I couldn't make it because of a scheduling problem. Find me a solution, or find me someone who can. She hung up without waiting for an answer. The first assistant, a young man with a headset, half-jogged to keep up. Ms. Whitmore, Captain Doyle isn't answering. His backup called in he's grounded medical. They pulled his certificate this morning. Then get me another pilot. There's no one. There is always someone. She stopped walking. The whole convoy stopped with her. I own an aerospace company. I employ 11,000 people. Do not stand in my hangar and tell me there is no one who can fly a jet. Adrian was 30 feet away, kneeling at the nose gear with a flashlight in his teeth, and he heard all of it. He kept his eyes on the strut. Not his problem. Not his fight. But Sophia Whitmore had already seen him. She saw the coveralls. She saw the grease on his forearms. She saw the mechanic's badge clipped to his chest, and in the space of half a second, she made the same judgment she'd been making about people her entire life. She filed him under invisible and moved on. Except there was no one else to move on to. The terminal was nearly empty. 2 flight attendants, 3 assistants, a CEO with a 4-hour window closing fast, and 1 man in coveralls. She walked toward him. Her heels rang on the concrete. You, she said. Adrian took the flashlight out of his mouth and stood up. Ma'am. Do you work on these aircraft? I maintain them, yes. Do you fly them? The question hung there. Adrian looked at her for a moment. He could feel the whole terminal watching. Danny, over by the fuel truck, had gone completely still. "No," Adrian said. "I maintain aircraft. I don't fly them." Something flickered across Sophia's face. Not disappointment. Contempt. The clean, casual contempt of someone who has just confirmed exactly how little they thought of you. "Of course you don't," she said, and then she smiled. It was the coldest thing Adrian had seen in years. "You know what your problem is?" she said loud enough for everyone to hear. She wasn't really talking to him anymore. She was talking to the room. "Men like you spend your whole lives underneath the aircraft, and you convince yourselves that makes you important, that the world couldn't fly without you." She gestured at the Gulfstream behind her gleaming white in the terminal lights. "But when it actually matters, when there's an actual jet and an actual sky, you're useless to me. You're a wrench. That's all you are." One of the assistants laughed nervously, then another. It gave the others permission, and suddenly there was a small ripple of laughter running through the convoy, the ugly kind of laughter that isn't really about anything funny, just about being on the right side of the powerful person. Adrian didn't move. His face didn't change. Sophia stepped closer. She was enjoying it now. "Tell you what," she said. "You think you're a real aviation man? You want me to look you in the eye and respect you? Fine." She pointed at the jet. "Fly it. Fly this jet to Portland. Then we'll talk." She let that sit for a second, then delivered the line like a blade. "But you won't. Because you can't. Because you're exactly what you look like." The laughter swelled, and Adrian Cole, the invisible mechanic, the widower, the man who cut the crusts off peanut butter sandwiches at 4:45 in the morning, did something nobody in that terminal expected. He looked at the jet, really looked at it. The way a man looks at an old house he grew up in. The way you look at something that used to be yours. Then he looked back at Sophia Whitmore. "All right," he said. The laughter stopped. Not slowly, all at once, like a switch had been thrown. "Excuse me," Sophia said. "I said all right." Adrian's voice was quiet, steady. It carried more weight quiet than hers had loud. "I'll fly it." For a moment, nobody breathed. The young assistant with the headset actually took a step backward, like the air in the room had changed pressure. Sophia recovered first. She laughed, but it wasn't the same laugh. It had a crack in it now. "You'll fly it. You, a mechanic. You're going to fly my $40 million Gulfstream to a meeting with 3 United States senators." "That's what you asked me to do." "I was making a point." "So am I," Adrian said. And there it was. The first tremor of doubt in Sophia Whitmore's face. Because a bluffing man gets loud. A bluffing man protests and puffs up and makes excuses. This man had just gotten quieter. And in 20 years of reading people across boardroom tables, Sophia Whitmore had learned that the quiet ones were the only ones who ever scared her. "Danny," Adrian said without turning around. "Bring me the aircraft records. Airframe logbook engine logs, and the last 3 release to service sign-offs." Danny stood frozen by the fuel truck, mouth open. "Danny?" Yeah. Yeah, boss." Danny bolted. Sophia's head turned slowly between the two of them. "What is he doing?" "He's getting me the records," Adrian said. He walked toward the jet. Not fast, not slow, just walking the way a man walks toward something he understands completely. "You want me to fly this aircraft, I'm going to know this aircraft first. Every jet's got a history. I'm not taking anybody's word for it, not even yours." "You can't just—" Sophia started after him. Her assistant scrambled to follow. "This is insane. This is a liability nightmare. Marcus," she snapped at the headset assistant. "Call legal." "Ma'am?" Adrian stopped and turned around, and for the first time there was something in his voice that made every person in that terminal go still. It wasn't anger. Anger they could have handled. It was authority. Absolute, bone-deep, unmistakable authority. "You just told a roomful of people that I'm a wrench, that I'm useless. You made your point real loud." He held her gaze. Now you've got about 3.5 hours to get to Portland, and I'm the only person standing in this building with a set of hands. So you can call legal, or you can let me do my job. Your meeting, your call." The silence that followed was the loudest thing in the hangar. Sophia Whitmore had in 20 years out-negotiated defense contractors, faced down hostile boards, and buried competitors who thought they were smarter than her. She was not a woman who lost control of a room. She had just lost control of the room, and she didn't even know why. "Marcus?" she said finally, her voice careful now. "Hold on, legal." "Ma'am?" I said, "Hold on." Her eyes never left Adrian. "Who are you?" Adrian turned back toward the jet. "I told you," he said. "I'm the wrench." Danny came running back across the tarmac with an armful of binders, breathing hard. "Got 'em. Airframe log, both engine logs, and the release sheets. Boss, what are you—" Adrian took the binders and set them on the wing of a baggage cart. He opened the first one and started reading, and the way he read it stopped Danny cold, because Danny had watched a lot of pilots do a lot of walkarounds. They glanced, they skimmed, they signed. This was different. Adrian's finger moved down the pages fast, but not carelessly. He was hunting. He flipped to the engine log, cross-referenced a date, flipped back, checked a cycle count against the airframe hours, and did it all in maybe 90 seconds. "Number 2 engine's got a compressor wash overdue by 11 cycles. Adrian murmured almost to himself. "Not a no-go. Note it." He flipped again. "Last release to service was 4 days ago. Who signed it?" Danny looked. Peterson." "Peterson's good." Adrian nodded once. "All right. Records are clean enough to fly." Behind him, one of the flight attendants had come down the air stairs, a young woman, maybe 28, in a crisp uniform. She'd been the second in command on Captain Doyle's crew, a working co-pilot who flew the right seat on longer legs. Her name was Rachel Kim, and she had been watching the entire exchange from the doorway of the jet with her arms crossed, and a look on her face that said she'd already decided this was a disaster. "You've got to be kidding me," Rachel said, coming down the stairs. "Ms. Whitmore, tell me you're not actually letting the mechanic— Are you certified to fly right seat on this airframe?" Adrian asked her, not looking up from the log. Rachel blinked. "Yes, I hold a type rating. I fly co-pilot on longer legs when Doyle needs a break, but I've never—" "Then you're the crew," Adrian said. "You're second in command. I'm pilot in command. We do this by the book, or we don't do it at all. That work for you. That does not work for me, because I don't know you from a stranger off the street, and you just told everyone in this building you don't fly." Adrian finally looked up, and when he did, he looked at Rachel differently than he'd looked at Sophia. He looked at her the way one professional looks at another, with respect. "You're right to push back," he said. "That's exactly what a good second-in-command does. If your gut says something's wrong, you say it, and you keep saying it until you're satisfied. I want a co-pilot who'll tell me I'm wrong. So here's what we're going to do." He closed the binder. "You're going to walk the aircraft with me. You're going to challenge every item on the checklist. And if at any point, takeoff, climb, cruise, anywhere, you see one thing that tells you I don't belong in that seat, you say the word, and I'll shut it down myself. Deal?" Rachel stared at him. This was not how bluffers talked. Bluffers didn't invite scrutiny. Bluffers ran from it. "Deal," she said slowly. "Good. Let's walk it." And they did. Adrian led the pre-flight walk-around, and Rachel followed, and with every single item the knot in her stomach got tighter, not because he was wrong, but because he was right over and over, in a way that no mechanic and no rusty amateur ever could be. He checked the pitot tubes and the static ports and the angle of attack vanes. He ran his hand along the leading edge of the wing and stopped at a spot she wouldn't have looked twice at. He crouched at the main gear and checked the brake wear pins by feel. He looked up at the tail and read the trim setting and nodded like it confirmed something he already knew. Halfway around the aircraft, Rachel stopped asking herself whether he could fly it. She started asking herself who he was. "Where'd you learn this?" she said quietly so the others couldn't hear. Adrian didn't answer for a moment. He was looking up at the fin at the sky beyond it, and something passed over his face, something old and heavy that had nothing to do with the Gulf Stream. "A long time ago," he said. "In a different life." "That's not an answer." "No," he agreed. "It's not." Sophia Whitmore stood by the air stairs and watched the whole thing, and with every passing minute, the ground shifted a little more under her feet. She had built her entire career on being the smartest, sharpest person in every room. She read people for a living. She'd sized this man up in half a second and been certain. A wrench. A grease monkey with delusions. She'd humiliated him in front of a dozen people to make a point about who mattered and who didn't. And now she was watching that same man command an aircraft inspection with a fluency that her own veteran captain didn't have. She was watching her co-pilot, a woman she knew to be skeptical, careful, hard to impress, go from openly hostile to visibly rattled in the span of 10 minutes. Something was very, very wrong with her read on this situation. She pulled Marcus aside. "The mechanic," she said under her breath. "Cole. What's his name? Adrian Cole. That's what his badge says. Run him." Her jaw was tight. "Right now. Everything. Employment background, all of it. I want to know who I just—" She stopped herself. "I want to know who he is." Marcus was already typing on his tablet. "On it. Might take a few. Now, Marcus." Across the tarmac, Adrian finished the walk-around and turned to Rachel. "How do you feel?" Rachel exhaled. She'd been looking for a reason to stop this for 10 minutes. She hadn't found one. "I feel like I have no idea what's happening," she admitted. "But I don't have a technical reason to refuse the flight. Everything you've done is textbook. Better than textbook." "Then let's get everybody boarded and get you to Portland." Adrian glanced at Sophia. "That's still where you want to go, right? Or was the whole thing just for the audience?" Sophia's mouth opened, closed. For the first time in her adult life, she genuinely did not know what to say to another human being. "Portland," she managed. "Then let's go." They boarded. Sophia took her usual seat, but she didn't touch her phone. She watched the cockpit door. Her assistants buckled in around her in nervous silence. The whole cabin had the electric, held-breath quality of people who all knew they were watching something impossible, and none of them could look away. In the cockpit, Adrian slid into the left seat, the captain's seat, and something in his body changed the moment he did. Rachel saw it happen and felt the hair on her arm stand up. It was like watching a man put on a coat that had been hanging in the closet for years and fit him perfectly. His hands moved over the panel without hesitation. He didn't fumble for a single switch. He didn't hunt for anything. He touched each control the way you touch the face of someone you love in the dark, knowing exactly where everything is. "All right," Adrian said, and his voice had changed too. Calmer, if that was possible. Flatter. The voice of a man doing the most natural thing in the world. "Before start checklist. You call, I'll respond. Challenge me on anything." Rachel pulled out the laminated card with a slightly unsteady hand. Parking brake. Set. Fuel quantity. Checked. 11,200 pounds. More than enough for Portland with reserves. Flight controls. Adrian moved the yoke through its full range, full left, full right, forward, back, and then the rudder pedals, smooth and complete. Free and correct. Flight instruments. He ran his eyes across the panel in a single sweep. Set and cross-checked. Altimeters agree. He paused. "You want to catch me making a mistake, Rachel, watch me here. 90% of the trouble people get into, they get into because they stopped cross-checking. So cross-check me. Every time. All the way to Portland." She looked at him. "Why do you keep inviting me to catch you?" "Because," Adrian said, "the day a pilot stops wanting to get caught is the day he becomes dangerous." He flipped a switch and the first engine began to spool up with a low rising whine. "I flew with a man once who thought he was too good to be checked." "What happened to him?" Adrian's hand paused over the panel for just a fraction of a second, just a heartbeat. "He didn't come home," Adrian said. And then he moved on, because there was work to do, and the aircraft came alive around them, and 30 feet behind that cockpit door sat a billionaire who had called this man a wrench 40 minutes ago and was now gripping her armrest with white knuckles. In the cabin, Marcus's tablet buzzed. He looked down at the screen, and his face did something Sophia had never seen it do. It went pale. "Ms. Whitmore," he whispered. He leaned across the aisle. "The background. On Cole. You need to see this." She took the tablet. She read. And Sophia Whitmore, who had faced down defense secretaries and hostile boards without flinching, felt her stomach drop straight through the floor of the aircraft. Adrian James Cole, United States Air Force. 12 years of service, test pilot, and then a string of words that stopped her cold. A squadron designation she recognized because her own company had built airframes for it. A program so classified that half the aircraft listed in his record were things Whitmore Aerospace had bid on, and lost things, she'd been told, didn't officially exist. Commendations. A distinguished flying cross. And then the thing that made her hands go cold, a single line about an accident during a classified flight test. A fatality. Another test pilot. And a note that Captain Adrian Cole had been the surviving aviator, had been cleared of all fault by the investigation board, and had voluntarily separated from service 8 months later. He hadn't been discharged. He hadn't washed out. He'd walked away. From one of the most exclusive and dangerous flying jobs in the entire United States military. He'd walked away, changed his name off, nothing but taken a job crawling under other people's airplanes, and never told a soul. Sophia looked up from the tablet through the cockpit door that Rachel hadn't fully latched at the back of the man's head. At the grease still on the collar of his coveralls. At the same worn boots she'd sneered at 40 minutes ago. "Fly this jet, then we'll talk," she'd said. "You're a wrench. That's all you are." She'd taken one of the finest pilots this country had ever quietly produced, a man who'd flown aircraft she couldn't get security clearance to look at, a man carrying a grief she couldn't begin to imagine, and she'd stood in her own hangar and told him he was useless. "Marcus," she said, and her voice didn't sound like her own. "Why does a man like that? Why is he a mechanic?" Marcus shook his head slowly. "It doesn't say, ma'am." He hesitated. "But if I had to guess..." He looked at the classified accident line at the name of the pilot who hadn't survived. "I'd guess it's got something to do with whoever that was." In the cockpit, both engines were running now, warm and even, and Adrian keyed the radio. "Ground Gulfstream November 47 Whiskey Private Terminal requesting taxi with information for a VFR departure to Portland." The controller's voice came back routine, unaware that anything at all unusual was happening. And Rachel Kim, sitting in the right seat of an aircraft being commanded by a man who 40 minutes ago had told a CEO he didn't fly, watched Adrian Cole's hands rest easy on the controls, and she finally understood what she'd been watching this whole time. He wasn't learning. He wasn't remembering even. He'd never actually left. You can take a man out of the sky. But some men, the rare ones, the ones built for it down in the marrow, the sky never really lets go of them. It just waits, quiet and patient, for years if it has to. "Ready to taxi, Captain?" Rachel asked. And she noticed she'd said it without a trace of the doubt she'd started with. She'd said it the way you say it to someone who has earned the title. Adrian released the parking brake, and the jet began to roll. "Let's go bring her home," he said. And behind him, for the first time in a very long time, Sophia Whitmore folded her hands in her lap, lowered her head, and did something she hadn't done since she was a girl. She prayed she'd been wrong about a man. She had never in her life been so glad to be wrong. The jet rolled forward, and every person in the cabin felt it in their stomach. Adrian's feet worked the pedals with a lightness that didn't match the size of the aircraft. He steered the nose wheel down the taxi line so smoothly that the coffee in the galley didn't so much as ripple. And Rachel Kim, watching from the right seat, found herself doing something she'd never done with a captain before. She was watching his feet. Not his hands, not the instruments, his feet. Because she'd noticed in the first 10 seconds of taxi that most pilots ride the brakes on the taxiways, ride them. The way nervous drivers ride the brake pedal in traffic. Little tap after little tap. Adrian didn't touch the brakes at all. He was managing the whole thing with power and geometry, feeding in just enough thrust to keep her rolling, letting her coast using the momentum, never fighting the airplane for a single inch. "You don't ride the brakes," Rachel said. "No. Doyle rides the brakes. Doyle's a good pilot," Adrian said, eyes moving between the taxi chart clipped to his knee and the yellow line disappearing under the nose. "But he learned in airplanes that were forgiving. This airplane's forgiving too. You just have to trust it to be." He eased her around a gentle left turn toward the run-up area. "Brakes are for stopping. Everything else you let the airplane do the work." Rachel didn't answer. She was writing something down in her head, filing it away the way you file away a thing a real teacher says, without meaning to teach you. "Before takeoff checklist," Adrian said. "Call it." She pulled the card. Her voice was steadier now. "Flaps. Set for takeoff. Confirm the indicator, don't take my word." She looked. The flap indicator read exactly where his hand had put it. "Confirmed. Set for takeoff." Flight controls. He swept them again, full and free. Free and correct. Trim. Set green band. Cross-check it. Trim's in the green. Engine instruments. His eyes ran the row of gauges. All in the green. Temps, normal, pressures, normal. Number 2's a hair warm from that overdue wash, but well inside limits. He paused. "You watching all this, or you taking my word for it?" "I'm watching." "Good. Keep watching. All the way to Portland." From the cabin through the door, Rachel still hadn't fully latched. Sophia. Whitmore watched the two of them go back and forth like a call and response in a church. One voice challenging one voice answering, and she realized she was hearing something she had heard maybe twice in 20 years of running an aerospace company from the top floor of a glass building. She was hearing what it actually sounded like down here. Not the boardroom version, not the safety record slide with the green bars. The real thing. Two professionals strapped into 40,000 pounds of metal and fuel checking and cross-checking each other, because their lives depended on it, and doing it in the flat, unhurried voices of people who had made peace with exactly how much was at stake. She had spent her whole career selling this. She had never once sat close enough to hear it. "Marcus," she whispered. "Ma'am. When we land in Portland, I don't want you to call ahead. I don't want a car pulled up early. I don't want anything." She was still looking at the back of Adrian's head. "I want to watch how he lands it first." Marcus glanced at his tablet, then at his boss. He'd worked for Sophia Whitmore for 3 years, and he'd never once heard her say she wanted to watch anything. She gave orders. She didn't observe. "Yes, ma'am," he said. Adrian keyed the radio. "Tower Gulfstream November 47 Whiskey, holding short of the active ready for departure." The tower cleared them. Adrian read it back word for word clean, and then he turned to Rachel, and for the first time since he'd walked toward that airplane, something in his face softened. Just for a second. "Rachel." "Yeah, whatever happened before the stuff downstairs, the CEO, all of it, none of that comes up the runway with us. The second we're rolling, there's just the airplane and the sky and the two of us. Nobody's proving anything to anybody. We're just going to fly a good airplane well. Okay." She looked at him, and something in her chest loosened that she hadn't even known was tight. "Okay," she said. "Then let's go to work." He pushed the throttles forward, and the whole world changed. The engines spooled up from a whine to a roar, and the Gulfstream leapt down the runway with a surge that pressed everyone back into their seats. And in the cockpit, Adrian Cole's hands and feet moved in a quiet, continuous conversation with the machine that Rachel would spend the rest of her career trying to describe to people, and never quite manage. He kept the nose wheel dead on the center line, with tiny inputs so small she could barely see his feet move. His right hand rode the throttles. His eyes flicked from the runway to the airspeed to the engine gauges and back in a rhythm so smooth it looked like a single motion. 80 knots, Rachel called. Checked. Airspeed's alive on both sides. V1. V1. His hand came off the throttles exactly the way the book said, exactly the way it was supposed to, and almost never quite was, because past this speed, there was no more stopping, only flying. Rotate. And Adrian pulled the nose up into the sky with a smoothness that made Rachel's breath catch, and the Gulf Stream lifted off the concrete and climbed, and the shuddering of the wheels on the pavement vanished all at once into that clean, singing silence that only exists in the first second of flight. Behind the cockpit door, Sophia Whitmore let out a breath she'd been holding for 20 seconds and didn't realize it. "Positive rate," Rachel called. "Gear up." She reached for the lever and pulled it, and the gear thumped up into the belly, and they were climbing out over the green edge of Washington State with a man at the controls that everyone in the building had laughed at 45 minutes ago. "Nice airplane," Adrian said quietly, almost to himself. "She's a nice airplane." And Rachel, who had flown right seat behind Doyle for 2 years and had heard Doyle say a lot of things, had never once heard a pilot talk to an airplane like it was a person he was glad to see again. "You talk to it," she said. "Old habit. From the different life." He didn't answer for a moment. The vertical speed needle sat rock steady. The airspeed climbed exactly the way it was supposed to. Outside, the ground fell away, and the horizon opened up wide and blue and endless in front of them. "From the different life," he agreed, and then softer. "You spend enough years flying airplanes that might kill you, you start being polite to them, just in case they're listening." Rachel looked at the side of his face. "The airplanes that might kill you," she repeated. "You mean test aircraft?" Adrian's jaw tightened just barely. "Ground doesn't need to hear my life story to give us a climb clearance," he said. "Call up departure." She let it go, but she'd heard him. Test aircraft. She filed it with the pitot tubes he'd checked by feel, and the trim setting he'd read off the tail from 30 feet, and the way he'd said about the pilot who thought he was too good to be checked, he didn't come home. She filed all of it, and the picture it was building was so far outside anything she'd imagined about the grease-stained man from the hangar that she almost couldn't hold it in her head. They leveled off at cruise. Adrian trimmed the aircraft, brought the power back to a fuel-efficient setting, and for a while there was nothing to do but fly, which meant there was nothing to do at all, because a well-trimmed jet at altitude mostly flies itself. He sat back. His shoulders came down half an inch. And for the first time, the mechanic and the pilot looked like the same man, a tired, ordinary guy in coveralls, sitting in a comfortable chair 7 miles above the ground he usually crawled around on. "Can I ask you something?" Rachel said. "You can ask. Why'd you tell her you don't fly?" Adrian looked out the window. The clouds below them were pulling apart into long white streamers, and the sun was hitting the tops of them, and it was, if you cared about that sort of thing, one of the most beautiful views a human being can have. "Because I don't," he said. "I didn't. For 6 years I didn't touch anything with wings except to fix it and hand it back to somebody else. That was the truth. When she asked me, I told her the truth." "But you could. There's a lot of things a man could do that he decides not to." He kept looking out the window. "For a long time, I decided not to do this." "Why?" And there it was again, that heaviness, that thing that had crossed his face at the tail of the aircraft, the thing that had no business being in the cockpit of a nice airplane on a beautiful day. "You ever lose somebody, Rachel?" She was quiet a second. "My mom, 3 years ago." "Then you know," Adrian said. "You know that there's before and there's after, and you know that the person you were in the before, you can't get back to him. He's just gone. And sometimes, without meaning to, you decide the only way to keep faith with what you lost is to make sure you stay gone too." Rachel didn't say anything. Outside, the streamers of cloud slid by underneath them. "I flew with a man for 9 years, Adrian said, and his voice was very even, the way a voice gets, even when a man has practiced not letting it break. His name was Danny Vance. Everybody called him Vance. He was the best natural stick I ever saw, and I saw a lot of them. We came up together. Test pilot school, then the program. We flew things." He stopped himself. "We flew things I still can't talk about. Things that were more experiment than airplane. Some of them barely wanted to fly. And Vance and we figured out how to make them fly anyway because that was the job. What happened to him? Adrian's hands were resting on his thighs now, not on the controls, and Rachel watched them slowly close into fists. That's a longer story than we've got airspace for, he said. And it's not one I tell in cockpits. He unclenched his hands deliberately, one finger at a time. Ask me on the ground someday if you want, but not up here. Up here I owe this airplane my whole attention. He glanced at her. And so do you. Cross-check the fuel. She did. Fuel's balanced. Burns exactly on plan. Good. He nodded. You're a good co-pilot, you know that. You push back at the right times, and you shut up at the right times. That's the whole job. Most people never learn the second half. Rachel felt her face warm. She'd been flying for 8 years, and Captain Doyle had never once, not one single time, told her she was good at anything. Thanks, she said. I mean it. In the cabin, Sophia Whitmore had unbuckled and moved to the seat closest to the cockpit door, close enough to hear the low murmur of the two voices, even if she couldn't make out every word. She sat with her hands folded, and she listened to the rhythm of it, the challenges, the responses, the long, comfortable silences that only exist between two people who trust the same machine. And somewhere over the Washington-Oregon line, the thing she'd been holding at the back of her throat since Marcus handed her that tablet finally worked its way loose, and Sophia Whitmore realized she was ashamed. She could not remember the last time she'd been ashamed. Embarrassed, sure. Wrong occasionally in the way that costs money. But ashamed, that low-hot personal thing that has nothing to do with dollars and everything to do with the kind of person you turn out to be when you're not looking, she couldn't remember the last time. Maybe she never had. Maybe you had to be handed a mirror this specific to see it. You're a wrench. That's all you are. She'd said that. In front of a dozen people. To a man who'd flown aircraft her own engineers dreamed about, a man carrying a grief she couldn't have survived, a man who cut the crusts off. She didn't even know if he had kids, she realized. She didn't know one single true thing about him. She'd taken one look at his boots and decided she knew everything. Marcus, she said quietly. He leaned in. Ma'am, does the file say if he's got family? Marcus scrolled. There's a marriage on record, and a... He paused. His face changed. There's a death certificate, ma'am, spouse, 3 years ago. He scrolled further. And a dependent, a daughter. She'd be looks like 8 years old now. Sophia closed her eyes. A widower, raising a little girl, crawling under airplanes at dawn so that a child who'd already lost her mother would never come home to an empty house. And Sophia Whitmore had flown into his workplace in a $40,000 suit and told him in front of his coworkers that he was nothing but a tool. He never said a word, she murmured. Ma'am. He didn't defend himself. He had every one of those things, the record, the medals, the dead friend, the little girl at home. He had all of it. And when I called him useless in front of everybody, he didn't reach for a single one of them. She opened her eyes. He just said, all right, and went and did the thing. Marcus didn't have anything to say to that. He was 29, and he'd never seen his boss like this. That's a kind of strength I don't have, Sophia said mostly to herself. I've never had it. My whole life, the first thing I do when somebody comes at me is reach for the biggest thing I've got and hit them back with it harder. She looked at the cockpit door. He had the biggest thing in the room, and he just set it down and walked past it. Up front, Rachel had been quiet for a while, and then she said the thing she'd been working up to. She's scared of you now. Whitmore, you know that, right? Adrian glanced at her. She's not scared of me. She's scared of being wrong. Those aren't the same thing. Feels like the same thing from back there. It never is. He adjusted the heading a couple of degrees to line up with the arrival. People who are scared of you, you can't do anything with. But people who are scared of being wrong, those are the only people who ever actually change. The fear's the crack. That's where the light gets in. He caught himself. My wife used to say that. Not the light part, the rest. What was she like? Adrian was quiet for a second. And then something happened to his face that Rachel hadn't seen yet. It wasn't the heaviness. It was almost the opposite. It was a small, private, involuntary softness. The kind that shows up when a man thinks about someone he loved and just for that second forgets that they're gone. "She was smarter than me," he said. "By a lot. She was a school teacher, 3rd grade. She used to say she managed 30 tiny dictators for a living, and it was better training for real life than anything the Air Force ever did to me." He almost smiled. She wasn't impressed by the flying. That's what I loved about her. Everybody else in my world thought the flying was the whole thing. She thought the flying was a job I happened to have. She wanted to know if I'd taken the trash out. Rachel laughed, surprised. "She kept me human," Adrian said. The softness stayed a moment longer, and then slowly it went the way the sun goes off the top of a cloud. And then she got sick, and there wasn't a single maneuver I knew that could do anything about it. 9 months. That was all. 9 months from the diagnosis to... He stopped. And I sat in a hospital hallway, and I understood for the first time in my life that being the best pilot in the room doesn't mean anything at all. That you can be the best in the world at the one thing you do and still be completely, totally powerless in front of the only thing that matters. The cockpit was quiet. Below them, Oregon was coming up green and folded, and the Arrival was starting to unspool ahead of them, and Adrian's hands were already back on the controls, already flying, because that was the thing he did with the parts of himself he couldn't put anywhere else. "That's when you quit," Rachel said softly. "Both things. The flying and..." "That's when I understood what my job actually was," Adrian said. "My job was Emma, that's my daughter. My job was making sure the one parent she had left never, not once, not for a single day, gave her a reason to be afraid. The flying was over anyway. That was a different wound, a different day. I'll tell you on the ground, but even if it hadn't been, I'd have set it down. You can't chase the sky and raise a scared kid at the same time. Not the way I fly, not the way I flew." He shook his head. "So I found the quietest job I could that still kept me around airplanes, because I couldn't quite let go of them completely, and I put on the coveralls and I disappeared. And it worked. For 6 years it worked. Until today. Until a woman in a nice suit told me to fly her jet," Adrian said. "And there was no bitterness in it. None at all. Just a kind of wonder. You know the strangest part? I'm not even angry at her. An hour ago, I'd have told you I never wanted to sit in this seat again. And now..." He looked out at the sky he'd stayed away from for 6 years, the sky that had waited for him with all the patience in the world. "Now I don't know what I feel. That's the honest answer. I don't know what I feel." Rachel looked at him for a long moment. "For what it's worth," she said, "you look like you're exactly where you're supposed to be." Adrian didn't answer, but his hands stayed easy on the controls, and something in his shoulders had let go, and Rachel understood that she'd said a true thing, and that it had landed somewhere in him that had been closed off for a very long time. The approach controller's voice came up in their headsets, vectoring them for the arrival into Portland, and Adrian shifted gears without a seam, the private man folding back into the professional in the space of a single breath. Portland approach Gulfstream 47 Whiskey Level 230 with the arrival information. The controller came back with a descent and a heading, and Adrian read it back clean, and the nose came down, and the green folds of Oregon started rising up to meet them. Rachel ran the descent checklist. Adrian responded to every item, cross-checked every one, and the aircraft came down through the thinning afternoon light, as smooth as water running downhill. "You want to hand fly the approach, or you want the automation?" Rachel asked, because that was what you asked a captain, and she'd stopped somewhere over southern Washington, thinking of him as anything but a captain. "I'll hand fly it," Adrian said. "It's been 6 years. I want to feel it." He glanced at her, and for the first time there was something almost boyish in it, something young that the coveralls and the grief had hidden. "Watch me close. If I've lost anything, you'll see it in the last 500 feet. That's where it always shows. Anybody can fly the easy part. The landing's where the truth comes out. And if you've lost something, then you take the airplane and I go back to being a mechanic and we never speak of it again," Adrian said. "But I don't think I have." He clicked the autopilot off, and the aircraft settled into his hands, and Rachel felt the difference immediately, the tiny, constant living corrections of a human pilot flying a machine he loved. Some things you lose. This isn't one of them. Behind the cockpit door, the cabin had gone silent. Sophia sat forward in her seat. Marcus had put the tablet away. Every assistant, every flight attendant, the whole cabin full of people who ran their lives at the top of an 11,000-person company sat as still as churchgoers. And none of them could have told you why, except that they all understood somewhere below words that they were about to watch a man do a thing he was born for. The runway came up out of the green, a gray ribbon laid across the earth, and Portland spread out around it, and the Gulf Stream came down the glide slope with the sun going gold behind it. 500 feet, Rachel called. Stable. On speed. On glide path. Watch your... She stopped, because there was nothing to watch. He was dead on. You're perfect. Don't tell me perfect. Perfect's how people get killed. His eyes were locked on the runway. Tell me the numbers. 300, on speed. Copy. 200, on speed sinking 500. Copy. The runway swelled. The ground rushed up. And in the last 100 feet, Adrian Cole did the thing that Rachel Kim would describe to other pilots for years afterward, and never quite capture the thing that separated the good ones from the great ones, and the great ones from whatever Adrian was. He brought the descent rate down to nothing. So gradually, so precisely, timing the flare against a runway rushing up at 130 knots, that the main wheels touched the concrete with a kiss so soft that half the people in the cabin didn't feel it happen. There was no thump. There was no jolt. There was just, at some moment, nobody could have named the sound of the wheels beginning to spin, and the airplane was flying. And then the airplane was rolling, and no one could have told you exactly where one became the other. Rachel sat back in her seat and let out a breath. That, she said quietly, was the best landing I've ever seen. And I've flown behind some good ones. Adrian didn't answer. He was busy nose wheel down, spoilers up, easing on the brakes, rolling her out straight and true down the center line, because the flight isn't over until the airplane is stopped, and he'd been a professional too long to celebrate anything with the machine still moving. He turned off at the taxiway and brought her to a smooth stop, and only then, only when the aircraft was fully stopped and the after-landing checklist was done, and there was nothing left to do, did Adrian Cole sit back in the captain's seat and close his eyes and let out a long, slow breath that seemed to come from somewhere 6 years deep. "Welcome back," Rachel said softly. He opened his eyes, and she saw that they were wet. "Yeah," he said, and his voice was rough. "Yeah." Neither of them said anything else. Some moments don't have room for words. In the cabin, the seat's belt sign went off, and for a second nobody moved, and then Sophia Whitmore stood up. She was a woman who was always the first out of an aircraft, always doors barely open before she was moving toward the next thing. This time she didn't move toward anything. She walked to the cockpit door, and she stopped there, and she looked in at the back of the man she'd humiliated 4 hours ago, and every single thing she'd planned to say died in her throat. Because what do you say? There is no sentence in the language of billion-dollar companies that fixes a thing like this. There's no offer, no gesture, no signing bonus, no apology polished enough. She had spent her entire life in a world where every problem was a negotiation, and every person had a price, and the right combination of words and money made anything go away. And she stood in the doorway of that little cockpit and understood all the way down that she was looking at a man that none of that worked on. He didn't want anything from her. He never had. He'd flown her jet, not because she'd baited him into it, not to prove her wrong, not for money. He'd flown it because she'd needed a pilot, and he was one, and that was the whole of it. "You needed a pilot," she could already imagine him saying in that quiet, flat voice. "I gave you one." "Captain Cole," she said. Adrian turned around in the seat, and for a second, just a second, the two of them looked at each other across everything, across the hangar, and the laughter, and the coveralls, and the medals, and the little girl at home, and the dead man named Vance she didn't know about yet, and the dead wife she did, and neither of them said anything, because both of them understood that whatever came next, it was going to matter. "Ma'am," Adrian said, I owe you an apology, Sophia said, and I already know it's not going to be enough, so I'm not going to insult you by dressing it up. She took a breath. It cost her something. Rachel could see it cost her something. I looked at you this morning, and I decided I knew exactly who you were. I was wrong about every single part of it. And the worst of it isn't even that I was wrong. It's that I was cruel about being wrong. In front of your people. In your own workplace. She held his eyes. I'm sorry. For all of it. The cabin behind her was dead silent. Marcus had never heard Sophia Whitmore apologize for anything in 3 years. He was fairly sure no one had. Adrian looked at her for a long moment. You want to know the truth, ma'am, he said finally. I do. I've been called worse by better. There was no cruelty in it. If anything, there was something almost gentle. Words downstairs don't mean much to me. I stopped flying for reasons that had nothing to do with what anybody thought of me, and I'm not going to start caring what people think now. He unbuckled his harness. You needed a pilot. I gave you one. That's the beginning and end of it. You don't owe me anything. That's exactly why I owe you everything, Sophia said quietly, and Adrian Cole, halfway out of the captain's seat, stopped. Because that was not what he'd expected her to say. He'd expected her to take the out. People always took the out. You don't owe me anything, was the thing you said, so the other person could say thanks, and everybody could walk away clean. He'd handed her the exit, and she hadn't taken it. He looked at her again differently this time. Ma'am, he said slowly, I've got a 15-year-old truck at that airfield and a daughter who needs picking up at 6. Whatever this is, whatever's happening behind your eyes right now, I want you to understand something. I'm not for sale. I flew your jet today. I'm not going to fly it tomorrow. I've got a life, and it's small, and it's mine, and it's the exact size I need it to be. He climbed out of the seat and reached for his jacket. So say your thanks, and let's both get on with our afternoons. How is she getting home? Sophia asked. Your daughter. Adrian went still. Excuse me. You said you have to pick her up at 6, from school, from a sitter. Sophia's voice had changed. The CEO edge was gone from it. And you're in Portland, and your truck's in Seattle. So I'm asking, how is your little girl getting home? And Adrian Cole, who had an answer for everything, who had stood in that hangar and outquieted a billionaire without breaking a sweat, who had flown a jet he swore he'd never touch again, with the calm of a man doing the dishes, Adrian Cole didn't have an answer for that. Because in the whole impossible afternoon, in the record and the flight and the landing and the apology, he had for the first time in 6 years forgotten about Emma. For 4 hours, he'd been the pilot again. And he'd forgotten the promise. Not the love of it, never the love of it, but the logistics of it, the 6 o'clock of it, the fact that his truck was 200 miles from where his body currently was, and his little girl was going to be standing outside Mrs. Alvarez's house at 6 o'clock, waiting for a father who was right now standing in an airplane in another state. The blood drained out of his face. What time is it? He said. Rachel checked. 4:15. I need... Adrian was already moving, already reaching for his phone, already doing the math that didn't work 200 miles, and no truck, and no time. I need to call Mrs. Alvarez. I need to figure out. Captain Cole? Sophia's voice cut through it, and it wasn't the cruel voice from the hangar, and it wasn't the gentle voice from the apology. It was a third voice, one Marcus recognized, one the whole company recognized, the voice she used when she'd decided something, and the deciding was already over. My jet is fueled. My pilot flew it here. My meeting is 90 minutes long. And then this aircraft is flying back to Seattle empty unless somebody's in it. She held his eyes. You are going to get in my car right now. You are going to sit in the back of my meeting, and you are going to be bored out of your mind. And then you are going to fly this airplane home, and I am going to have a vehicle waiting on the ramp in Seattle to take you straight to your daughter, and you are going to make your 6 o'clock. She paused. I made your afternoon complicated. Let me make it simple again. It's the very least I can do. Adrian stared at her. Why? He said. And Sophia Whitmore, who had never in her life explained herself to an employee who had built a wall around her, reasons so high that even Marcus had never seen over it, looked at the widowed pilot in the grease-stained coveralls, and she told him the truth. "Because 4 hours ago I told a room full of people that a man's worth is what he wears and where he stands," she said. "And then I watched you prove me wrong at 30,000 feet, without ever once raising your voice. And now you're standing here worried sick about a little girl instead of asking me for a raise, or a lawyer, or a headline, and I have spent my entire life around powerful people, and I have almost never seen anything like it." Her voice caught just slightly, and she didn't try to hide it. "I don't fully understand yet what I saw today, Captain, but I know I don't want to be the kind of person who saw it and did nothing." She stepped back from the door. "So get in the car, please. Let me help you get home to your daughter. And on the way, if you're willing, and only if you're willing, I would very much like to hear about the airplanes you can't talk about and the friend who didn't come home." Adrian Cole stood in the cockpit of a jet in Portland, Oregon, with his phone in his hand and his heart pounding for the first time all day. Not for the flying, but for the 6 o'clock. And he looked at the billionaire who had called him a wrench, and something in the whole broken, impossible shape of the afternoon shifted one final time. "All right," he said. And for the second time that day, that single quiet word changed everything. The car was black and silent, and smelled like leather. Nobody had ever spilled anything on, and Adrian Cole sat in the back of it with his phone pressed to his ear, and the first thing he did before he said one word to the CEO sitting across from him was call Mrs. Alvarez. "Rosa, it's Adrian." He kept his voice steady, the way he kept it steady in cockpits, because a scared voice makes everybody scared. "I'm going to be a little later than 6. Not much. Maybe 7:30. Can Emma stay with you till then?" He listened. Sophia watched him from the opposite seat and pretended to look at her phone, and didn't look at her phone at all. "No, everything's fine. Everything's fine, Rosa, I promise." A pause. "Tell her..." His voice did something small. "Tell her Dad had to fly today. She'll understand that. Just tell her Dad had to fly and I'll be home to read to her tonight, even if it's late. Tell her I don't break promises." Another pause and then softer. "Thank you. I owe you. Tell her I love her." He hung up. He sat with the phone in his hand for a second. And then he put it in his pocket and looked out the window and said nothing. And Sophia understood that the man had just spent more emotion on that 90-second phone call than he'd spent on the entire flight, and that this told her everything she needed to know about where his actual life was kept. "She's okay?" Sophia asked. "She's okay. Rosa's had her since she was 2. Emma loves her." Adrian kept looking out the window. "But she'll worry. She's 8. 8-year-olds keep a running tally of every time an adult said they'd be somewhere and weren't. Her mother..." He stopped. "Her mother never once missed anything. Not a recital, not a doctor's appointment, not a bad dream at 2 in the morning. So the bar's high. I inherited a high bar." "You're not going to miss anything," Sophia said. "I gave you my word." Adrian turned from the window and looked at her, and there was something almost curious in it, like he was seeing a species of animal he'd read about but never encountered in the wild. "You know what's strange," he said. "This morning your word wouldn't have meant anything to me. This morning you were a suit that yelled at people." He studied her. "It means something now. I don't know why. You haven't done anything yet but promise. But it means something. Maybe because I stopped pretending I was better than you," Sophia said. "People can feel that, when you stop." Adrian almost smiled. "My wife would have liked you." "You keep mentioning her. She keeps being relevant." He said it simply without weight, the way you'd mention that the sun keeps coming up. 6 years I've been keeping her in a box where she doesn't come out much because taking the lid off costs me something and I've got a kid who needs me put together. And today, the lid's just off. All the way off. First the flying, now this." He shook his head slowly. "You crawl under airplanes for 6 years specifically, so nothing surprises you. And then a stranger in a bad mood knocks the whole thing over in an afternoon. I'd say I'm sorry again, but you've made it pretty clear you don't want the apology." "I don't need the apology. That's different from not wanting it." He looked at her. Say it as many times as you need to. Just don't say it to make yourself feel better. Say it because you mean it or don't say it at all. That's all I ask of anybody." Sophia was quiet a moment. The car moved through Portland toward the government complex, where 3 senators and a deputy secretary of defense were waiting to hear Whitmore Aerospace's pitch. And for the length of 1 city block, the most powerful woman in the American private jet industry didn't say anything at all, because a mechanic had just told her the difference between an apology and a performance. And she was turning it over, because she'd been performing apologies her whole life. And she'd never once known there was another kind. "You said you'd tell me on the ground," she said finally. "About the friend, Vance." Adrian's jaw tightened. Rachel 200 feet up had earned that story, and not gotten it. He looked at Sophia now, at the woman who'd humiliated him, who was driving him to her meeting, who'd promised to get him home to Emma, and he tried to work out why he was even considering it. "Why do you want to know?" he said, honestly, not the polite version. Sophia considered the question with the seriousness it deserved. "Because I've built airplanes for 20 years, and I've never once flown a test flight," she said. "Because there are men and women who strap into the things my company designs before anyone knows whether they'll hold together, and I sign the budgets and I read the reports, and I have never let myself think too hard about what it costs them. And I think today I met one of them, and I think I owe it to all of them to hear it at least once from someone who lived it." She held his eyes. "That's the honest version. I want to know what my industry costs the people who actually fly it. And I think you're the first person who's ever going to tell me the truth." Adrian looked at her for a long time, and then he told her. "His name was Danny Vance," he said. "I called him Vance, everybody did, but his call sign was Preacher because he wouldn't shut up about right and wrong. Cleanest pilot I ever flew with. Not the flashiest, that was me. God help me, I was the flashy one, but the cleanest. Vance never took a shortcut in his life. He read every page of every manual. He'd fly a maneuver 100 times in the simulator before he'd try it once in the air. And he used to get on me about it because I flew on feel, and he flew on preparation, and he thought feel was going to kill me someday." Adrian's voice was very even. "Turned out it was preparation that couldn't save him, but I didn't know that yet." The car was silent. "We were testing an aircraft," Adrian said. "I can't tell you what it was. I can tell you it was new, and it was fast, and it did things airplanes weren't supposed to be able to do, and half of what it did, nobody fully understood yet, because that's what a test program is. You're finding out. That day, we were exploring a part of the flight envelope nobody'd been to. High altitude, high speed, a specific combination the engineers wanted data on. 2 aircraft. Vance in one, me in the other, flying formation, so we could watch each other. That was the plan. You watch each other. If something goes wrong on his airplane, I see it before he feels it, and I call it out, and he's got 2 seconds more warning than his instruments would give him. That's the whole reason for 2 airplanes." His hands had gone still in his lap. "That's the whole reason I was supposed to be watching." Sophia didn't move. She'd stopped breathing almost. "We hit the test point," Adrian said. "Everything's nominal. Everything's textbook. Vance is 100 feet off my wing, right where he's supposed to be, and we're both talking to the ground, calling out numbers. And it was beautiful. It was one of those flights where everything works, where the machine does exactly what you ask, and the sky's clear, and you remember why you ever wanted to do this." He stopped. "And then his airplane came apart." "Came apart," Sophia repeated softly. "Structural failure. Something in the airframe in that flight regime, at that speed. A thing nobody predicted because nobody'd ever been there before. That's what test flying is. That's the whole point of it. You go where nobody's been to find the things nobody predicted, and usually you find them small, and you write them down, and you fix them. Sometimes you find them big." His voice didn't break. It just got quieter and flatter, and somehow that was worse. "I was looking away. That's the thing. That's the thing I've carried for 6 years. At the exact second his airplane started to go, I was looking down at my own instruments, reading off a number to the ground, doing my job, and by the time I looked back up, it was already too far gone. Half a second, maybe less. I've done the reconstruction 1,000 times. I don't think I could have called it in time even if I'd been staring right at him." The investigation board agreed. They cleared me completely. Said there was nothing I could have done. But you don't believe them. I believe them, Adrian said. That's the strange part. I believe every word the board wrote. Intellectually, I know there was nothing I could have done. I know it the way I know how much fuel it takes to get to Portland. He looked at his hands. But knowing a thing and being free of it are two different countries, and there's no airplane that flies between them. Because the last thing I remember before it happened is choosing to look down at my instruments. I made a choice. It was the right choice. It was the correct choice. It was exactly what I was trained to do, and my best friend died in the half-second I wasn't watching. And you can't reason your way out of that. I tried for years. You can't. It just lives in you. Sophia's eyes were wet. She didn't bother hiding it. What happened after? She said. I flew for 8 more months, Adrian said. Because that's what you do. You get back in the airplane. That's the code. That's the whole culture. You don't let it beat you. You climb back in. And I climbed back in, and I flew, and I was fine. I was better than fine. I flew great. I flew angry, and I flew perfect. And everyone said, Cole's handling it. Cole's a rock. He shook his head. I wasn't a rock. I was a man holding his breath. And then one morning, I was doing a walk around on an aircraft, just a routine walk around, and I looked up at the tail, the way I'd looked up at Vance's tail 1,000 times, and I couldn't get in. I just couldn't. My hands wouldn't do it. I stood on that ramp for 20 minutes, and I could not make my body climb into the airplane. He was quiet. And I understood that the thing I'd been telling everyone, that I was fine, that I'd handled it, was a lie I'd been telling so well, I'd fooled myself. And I had a wife at home who deserved a husband who wasn't holding his breath. So I turned in my papers. Nobody understood it. I was up for command. I had the career everybody wanted. And I walked away from all of it. And I never told a soul the real reason, and I went and got a job fixing other people's airplanes because I could still be near them. I just couldn't be trusted in them anymore. That's what I believed. That I couldn't be trusted. The car was silent for a long moment. And then your wife got sick, Sophia said quietly. And then my wife got sick, Adrian said. 2 years later. And I found out there's a grief that makes the first one look like practice. He looked out the window. You want to know the truth? Losing Vance nearly ended me. Losing her nearly ended me worse. But between the two of them, there was Emma. And a man can't end while there's a kid in the house who needs breakfast. So you don't. You just don't. You get up at 4:30, and you make the coffee, and you make the lunch, and you show up, and showing up turns out to be the thing that saves you, even when you're only doing it to save somebody else. He turned back to Sophia. That's the whole story. That's why the mechanic doesn't fly. Because the last 2 times he loved something, it came apart at altitude, and he decided he'd rather crawl around on the ground where nothing can fall. Sophia Whitmore sat across from him, with tears running down her face in the back of a $200,000 car, on her way to close a defense contract, worth more than most towns, and she understood that she had just been handed something she had done nothing to earn, and would probably never fully deserve. Thank you, she said, for telling me. You asked honest. I answered honest. Adrian wiped his own eyes once with the back of his hand. Matter of fact, a man tidying up. Don't do anything with it. Don't make it a story you tell. Don't put Vance in a speech about resilience. He wasn't a lesson. He was a person, and he was my friend, and he read every page of every manual, and he deserved better than a metaphor. His voice hardened just slightly. If I ever hear you turned him into a metaphor, that's the end of whatever this is. You have my word, Sophia said, and you already told me my word means something now. Adrian almost smiled. It does. Damn it, it does. The car pulled up to the government complex, and Sophia wiped her face and became in the space of about 4 seconds an entirely different person, spine straight, jaw set, the wet eyes gone, like they'd never been there, the CEO reassembling herself for the room. Adrian watched it happen with genuine admiration. That's a hell of a trick, he said. It's the only trick I've got, Sophia said, gathering her briefcase. You've got the flying. I've got the face. She reached for the door handle, then stopped. Come in with me. I'm in coveralls. I know. I've got grease on my collar. You're meeting senators. I know exactly what you've got on your collar, Captain, Sophia said. And I'm asking you to walk into a room full of the most powerful people in American defense wearing it and sit in the back and watch me try to sell them airplanes. She held his eyes. Because I think I need to give a very different pitch than the one I prepared, and I think I can only give it if you're in the room. Adrian frowned. What are you talking about? You'll see, Sophia said, and got out of the car. He followed her because he didn't know what else to do. And because a small part of him, the part that had woken up somewhere over Oregon and refused to go back to sleep, wanted to see what she meant. The meeting was in a conference room with a view and a long table, and exactly the kind of people Adrian had spent 6 years being invisible to. 3 senators, 2 staffers each. A deputy secretary of defense, older, gray, sharp-eyed, a man who'd clearly been around aircraft his whole life. They looked up when Sophia walked in, and they looked past Adrian entirely filing him under staff or nobody the exact way Sophia had filed him that morning, and Adrian took a seat against the back wall and folded his hands and prepared to be furniture. Sophia set down her briefcase, and she didn't open it. I had a presentation prepared, she said to the room. It's a good presentation. It's got graphs. It shows you that Whitmore Aerospace has the best safety record in the industry, the best on-time delivery, the best margins. My people worked 3 weeks on it. She paused. I'm not going to give it. The senators exchanged glances. The deputy secretary raised an eyebrow. Something happened to me today, Sophia said. About 4 hours ago, my chief pilot got grounded on a medical, and I had a hangar full of people and a meeting with all of you. And I stood in that hangar and I looked at the men and women who actually keep my aircraft flying. And I picked out one of them, a mechanic in coveralls, and I humiliated him. In front of everyone. I told him he was a wrench. I told him he was useless. I told him to fly my jet as a joke to prove how far above him I was. Her voice was steady and clear, and she did not look away from the deputy secretary as she said it. And he flew my jet. He flew it here. He flew it better than any pilot I employ, because it turns out the mechanic I called useless is a decorated Air Force test pilot who flew aircraft that half of you in this room have clearances for, and I don't. The room had gone very, very still. Adrian against the back wall went rigid. This was not what he'd agreed to. This was not anything he'd agreed to. He's sitting against the wall behind you, Sophia said, in the coveralls. And I'm not going to tell you his name because he didn't give me permission to, and I've learned something today about the difference between a person and a story you tell about them. Her eyes flicked to Adrian, just for a second. An apology, a question, is this okay, and then back to the room. But here's why I'm telling you any of this. You're about to hand out a defense contract, and you're going to hand it to whoever's got the best graphs, and I came in here ready to win on graphs. But I sat in the back of my own jet today and watched that man run a 2-person cockpit with a co-pilot he'd known for 1 hour. And I watched him invite her, beg her to catch him in a mistake over and over because he understood something I've been selling for 20 years and never once believed that the safest aircraft in the world is worth nothing if the culture around it teaches people to stop checking each other. The Deputy Secretary of Defense leaned forward slightly. My company has the best safety record in the industry, Sophia said. And I found out today that I don't actually know why. I found out that I've been taking credit for the graphs when the graphs are made by people I never look at. Mechanics who fix things nobody signed off on. Pilots who push back when they should. People at the bottom of my org chart holding the whole thing up with their bare hands while I stand at the top and take the meetings. She finally opened the briefcase, took out the prepared deck, and set it face down on the table without showing a single slide. So I'm not going to sell you my safety record today. I'm going to make you a different promise. If Whitmore Aerospace gets this contract, I am going to spend the next year finding every single person in my company that I've been looking past, and I'm going to start listening to them because I have just been very publicly and very personally taught what it costs when I don't. She closed the briefcase. That's my pitch. That's the whole pitch. Thank you for your time. For a moment, nobody said anything. Then the Deputy Secretary of Defense. The gray man, the sharp-eyed one, turned around in his chair. He looked at Adrian against the back wall in the grease-stained coveralls. He looked for a long time. And something moved across his weathered face, some recognition passing between two men who'd both spent time around aircraft that didn't officially exist. "Test pilot," the Deputy Secretary said quietly. It wasn't a question. Adrian met his eyes. "Retired, sir." "Nobody retires from that," the Deputy Secretary said. "You just stop for a while." He studied Adrian another moment, taking in the coveralls, the collar, the whole improbable shape of him. "You flew the—" and he said a designation, 3 letters and a number so quietly that only Adrian heard it. Adrian went very still, and then almost imperceptibly he nodded. The Deputy Secretary sat back. He let out a low breath, and he looked at the 3 senators, and he said, "I've read that accident report, years ago. It's one of the reasons we changed the whole structural test protocol." He looked back at Adrian. "You were the other airplane." "I was the other airplane?" Adrian said. The room didn't fully understand what was passing between the 2 men, but they understood the weight of it, the way you understand the weight of something in a language you don't speak. And the 3 senators sat in silence, while a Deputy Secretary of Defense and a mechanic in coveralls held a conversation that was mostly happening in the spaces between the words. "For what it's worth, son," the Deputy Secretary said finally, "the changes that came out of what happened to you and your friend, they've saved lives, real ones. Pilots who are alive today because of a protocol that exists, because of the worst day of your life." He paused. "I don't imagine that helps much." "No, sir," Adrian said. "But I'm glad to know it. I didn't know it. Thank you for telling me." The Deputy Secretary nodded slowly. Then he turned back to Sophia Whitmore, and his expression shifted, the sharp administrative eyes coming back. "Ms. Whitmore," he said, "that was the strangest pitch I've heard in 30 years of sitting in these rooms." He let it hang. "It's also the first one in about a decade that I actually believed." He glanced once more at the man against the back wall. "We'll be in touch about the contract, but I'll tell you right now, a company that hires people like that even by accident, even to crawl under airplanes." He almost smiled. "That's a company that's got at least one thing right that you can't put on a graph." Sophia didn't answer. She just nodded once and gathered her briefcase. And in the back of the room, Adrian Cole sat in his grease-stained coveralls in a chair against the wall, having just heard a Deputy Secretary of Defense tell him that the worst day of his life had saved people he'd never meet. And for the first time in 6 years, the thing he'd carried since the day Vance's airplane came apart shifted a fraction of an inch inside his chest. Not gone, not healed, but moved. Just enough to feel it move. He looked at his watch. It was 5:40. He had a jet to fly home. He had a daughter to get to. And for the first time in 6 years, when Adrian Cole thought about climbing back into a cockpit, the thing he felt underneath the grief was something he hadn't let himself feel in a very long time. It felt almost like wanting to. The flight home was different, and both of them felt it before the wheels even left the ground. Rachel Kim was back in the right seat, and Sophia Whitmore had, for the first time in her adult life, chosen not to sit in her usual place. She sat instead on the little jump seat behind the cockpit, the one nobody important ever used, and she strapped in there without being asked and without explaining herself, and Adrian didn't comment on it. He just ran the checklist, and Rachel challenged him on every item, and somewhere over the Oregon border, the airplane climbed into a sky that was going gold and pink at the edges as the afternoon burned down toward evening. "You're flying different than you flew this morning," Rachel said when they'd leveled off. "How's that?" "This morning you flew like a man proving something. Now you're flying like a man who forgot he was ever trying to prove anything." She glanced at him. "It's better. I didn't think it could get better. It's better." Adrian didn't answer right away. His hands were easy on the controls, and the airplane was trimmed, and the whole machine hummed along in that contented way a well-flown jet has. and he looked out at the gold light on the tops of the clouds and let himself feel it, all of it, for the first time in 6 years, without immediately reaching to shut it off. "I told her about Vance," he said finally. Rachel turned. "The CEO, in the car, on the way to the meeting." Adrian kept his eyes forward. "I don't know why. I've never told anybody the whole thing. Not my wife, not really. She got pieces, but never the whole thing. And I told a woman who called me a wrench 4 hours ago the entire story start to finish in the back of her car." He shook his head slowly. "And you know what happened. Nothing broke. I said it out loud, and the world didn't end. 6 years I've been carrying it like it was radioactive, like if I ever said it out loud, it'd take the roof off. And I said it, and the car kept driving, and she cried, and then we went into a meeting." He let out a breath that was almost a laugh. "That's the part nobody tells you. That the thing you've been terrified to say out loud is just words. Once you say them, they're just words. Heavy ones, but just words." From the jump seat, Sophia said nothing, but Adrian knew she could hear, and he didn't mind, and that itself was a strange new fact about his afternoon. "In the meeting," Adrian went on, "there was a Deputy Secretary of Defense, old guy, and he knew. He knew the program. He'd read the accident report, the real one, the classified one, the one about Vance. And he looked at me and he said the changes that came out of it saved lives. Pilots who are alive right now because of a protocol that exists because of the worst day of my life." His voice was very quiet. "I didn't know that. 6 years, and nobody ever told me that. I thought the whole thing was just waste. Just a hole in the world where my friend used to be, and nothing on the other side of it. And there was something on the other side of it. There were people, alive, because of him, because of what we found out that day at the cost we paid to find it out." Rachel was quiet. Then she said, "Does that make it better?" "No," Adrian said honestly. "Nothing makes it better, but it makes it mean something, and that's not nothing. For 6 years it didn't mean anything. It was just loss. Now it means something. That's the first thing that's changed about it in 6 years." He glanced at her. "You want to know the truth? I think I've been flying this whole afternoon on that. On the fact that it means something now. Because a thing that means something you can carry. A thing that's just waste that you can't carry. That crushes you. I've been getting crushed for 6 years, and today somebody handed me a reason it wasn't waste, and all of a sudden I can stand up straight." Behind him on the jump seat, Sophia Whitmore was crying again silently, and she was glad neither of them could see her because she understood that she'd had nothing to do with the Deputy Secretary's words, that she'd just happened to be in the room. That all she'd done today was cause the man pain, and then accidentally drive him toward the one stranger in America who could hand him back a piece of what she'd taken from everyone like him for 20 years. And she thought, this is what it looks like when you finally sit close enough to hear it. "Portland approach cleared us direct," Rachel said. "I mean, Seattle approach. Sorry. Long day." She managed a tired smile. "Seattle Center's got us. We're 40 minutes out." 40 minutes, Adrian said. And something in him tightened, because 40 minutes out meant 40 minutes from Emma, and the closer he got to her, the more the flying receded, and the more the 6 o'clock came forward. "Rachel, when we land, Ms. Whitmore said there'd be a car." "There's a car," Sophia said from the jump seat. "It's already there. It's been there for an hour. My driver has your address, and he has Mrs. Alvarez's address, and he'll take you wherever your daughter is, and then wherever you need to go after that. You'll be with Emma before 8. I promise you that." She paused. "I know it's late. I know I made it late. But you'll be there tonight, and you'll read to her, and you won't have broken the promise. Just delayed it." Adrian looked back over his shoulder at her briefly, and something passed between them. Not forgiveness, exactly. It was too early and too big for forgiveness, but something in the neighborhood of it. "Thank you," he said. And then, because he was a fair man, even to people who hadn't earned it, "You could have just gone to your meeting and let me figure out my own way home. Most people would have. You made it your problem. I noticed." "It was my problem," Sophia said. "I made it your problem first. They flew the arrival in a comfortable quiet, the three of them, and the light kept going down, and Seattle came up out of the dusk, with its lights beginning to wink on, and Adrian hand flew the approach again, because he wanted to, because it turned out that was a thing a man could want, and he greased the landing again, soft, precise, the mains kissing the concrete so gently that Sophia on the jump seat actually laughed out loud, a startled, delighted sound. "How do you do that?" she said. "You stop trying to land the airplane," Adrian said, rolling out down the center line. "You just fly it lower and lower until it forgets it's flying. If you try to put it down, you'll put it down hard. You have to let it decide it's ready." He turned off onto the taxiway. "Vance taught me that. He said a good landing is a conversation, not a command." He was right. He was right about almost everything. That's the part that still gets me, how right he was and how little good it did him. He taxied to the ramp. And there, waiting under the ramp lights, was a black car exactly as promised. And beside the black car, Adrian's chest clenched, was a small figure holding a grown woman's hand. A small figure in a purple coat, jumping up and down and waving with both arms, the way only an 8-year-old waves. "That's," Adrian's voice caught. "That's Emma. That's my daughter. Rosa brought her." "How did—" "I sent a second car for them," Sophia said quietly from the jump seat. "I thought I didn't know if it was the right thing. Tell me if it wasn't the right thing. But I thought a girl whose dad had to fly today, whose dad kept his promise, I thought maybe she should get to see the airplane, see where he was, see that he wasn't just gone, that he was doing something." She trailed off. "I overstepped. Didn't I? I'm sorry, I don't know how to—" "Stop." Adrian's voice was rough. He was staring through the windshield at the little girl in the purple coat, and his hands had gone still on the controls, and when he spoke, it took him 2 tries. "Stop. It was—" He swallowed hard. "It was the right thing. It was exactly the right thing. I don't have words for how right a thing it was." He shut the engines down. He ran the checklist on autopilot muscle memory, carrying him through it, while his eyes stayed locked on Emma. And then he was up out of the seat and down the air stairs 2 at a time. And Emma broke free of Mrs. Alvarez's hand and ran across the ramp toward him, yelling, "Daddy! Daddy, you flew a plane!" Rosa said, "You flew a real plane!" And Adrian Cole caught his daughter up out of the air and held her against his chest and buried his face in her hair. And for a moment, the decorated test pilot and the invisible mechanic and the grieving widower all collapsed into one thing, which was just a father holding his kid on a windy ramp at the end of an impossible day. "I flew a plane, baby," he said into her hair. "I flew a plane. A big one. A big one." "Were you scared?" Adrian pulled back and looked at his daughter's face, and he thought about the honest answer, because he always gave her the honest answer. That was the deal he'd made when her mother died, that he would never lie to her about the things that mattered. "A little," he said. "At the start, a little. But you know what I told myself?" "What?" "I told myself what I always tell you. The airplane doesn't panic, and neither does the person flying it." He tapped her nose the way he did every morning. "And I thought about you. The whole time, way up there in the sky, I thought about a little girl I know who's braver than she thinks. And it made me brave, too." Emma threw her arms around his neck again, and over her shoulder, Adrian saw Sophia Whitmore standing at the top of the air stairs, watching, not coming down, giving them the space, her face wet again, and shining in the ramp lights. And he saw Rachel Kim beside her, arms crossed, smiling in that tired professional way. And he saw Rosa Alvarez with her hand over her mouth. And Adrian understood that everyone standing on that ramp had in one way or another just watched a man come back to life. He carried Emma over to the bottom of the stairs. "Emma," he said, "this is Ms. Whitmore. This is her airplane. She's the reason you got to come see it." Emma looked up at the tall woman at the top of the stairs with the frank, evaluating stare that only small children can get away with. "Are you the boss?" Emma asked. Sophia came down the stairs slowly. She crouched down to Emma's level, which Adrian noticed because crouching down to a kid's level is a thing that tells you something true about a person, and Sophia Whitmore did it without hesitation. "I'm the boss," Sophia said. "My dad's really good at planes." Emma informed her with the fierce loyalty of the very young. "He can fix anything. He fixed my bike and my music box and the toaster." "I believe it," Sophia said. "You know what I found out today?" "What?" "I found out your dad is one of the best pilots in the whole country. Maybe one of the best there's ever been." Sophia's voice was steady and clear, and she said it looking right at the little girl. "I didn't know that this morning. Nobody told me. And I said some things to him that I shouldn't have because I didn't know how special he was." She glanced up at Adrian, then back to Emma. "But he flew my airplane today and he showed everybody. And I wanted you to get to see it. Because a girl should get to see her dad be the best in the world at something." Emma considered this with tremendous seriousness. "He is the best in the world," she said finally. "At planes and at pancakes." Adrian let out a wet laugh. "At planes and at pancakes?" Sophia agreed gravely and stood up, and for just a moment she and Adrian looked at each other over the head of the little girl, and neither of them said anything because everything that needed saying had already happened somewhere over Oregon in the back of a car. Mrs. Alvarez took Emma's hand. "Come, mija. Let's let your papa talk to his boss for 1 minute and then we go get dinner." "Yes, your papa promised pancakes for dinner, and I am holding him to it." "Pancakes for dinner!" Emma shrieked and let herself be led a few steps away, and the ramp filled for a second with the pure, uncomplicated joy of a child who has gotten pancakes and an airplane in the same day. Adrian turned to Sophia. "I don't know what you want from me," he said. It wasn't hostile. It was honest the way everything he said was honest. "You've apologized. You got me home to my kid. You did more than you had to do, a lot more, and I'm grateful, I mean that. But I know your kind of person doesn't do all this without there being a—" he searched for the word, "without there being an ask coming. So ask, whatever it is. I'd rather hear it than wait for it." Sophia was quiet for a moment. Then she nodded slowly because it was a fair thing to say, and because he'd read her exactly right the way he'd been reading everyone right all day. "There's an ask," she admitted. "But it's not the kind you're bracing for. So let me say the whole thing before you answer, and then you can tell me no, and I'll still get you home tonight either way. This isn't attached to that. That's a promise, and you've told me my promises mean something now, so I'm spending one." She took a breath. "I have a company with the best safety record in the industry, and I found out today that I don't know why. I've got mechanics who fix things nobody signed off on, and I never see them. I've got pilots who get pressured to hit schedules instead of holding standards. I've got a whole culture down at the level where the actual airplanes are, and I've spent 20 years floating above it, taking credit for it, and never once listening to it." She looked at him steadily. "I want you to come fix that. Not the airplanes. The culture. I want you to run flight safety for Whitmore Aerospace. Top to bottom. Real authority, real title, real budget. Not a symbolic hire I trot out for photos. The actual job." Adrian was already shaking his head. "Ms. Whitmore, let me finish. You said I could finish." She held up a hand. "I know what you're going to say. You've got a small life, and it's the exact size you need it to be, and you're not for sale, and you've got a daughter, and you crawl under airplanes on purpose, because being trusted inside them costs you something you're not willing to pay." I heard all of it. I was listening. I've been listening all day, which is a new thing for me, so bear with me while I'm bad at it. She lowered her hand. "But here's what I saw today. I saw a man who invited his co-pilot to catch him in a mistake over and over because he understood that's what keeps people alive. I've got 11,000 people, Captain and I, have spent 20 years running a company where nobody at the bottom feels safe telling anybody at the top that they're wrong. And you know what that culture does. You know better than anyone in the world what that culture does because you lived through the worst version of what happens when people stop checking each other." Her voice dropped. "You told me not to turn Vance into a metaphor. I'm not going to. but I'm going to ask you to let his life mean one more thing. Come build me a company where the next Vance gets to come home. That's the ask. That's the whole ask." The ramp was quiet, except for Emma's distant voice still going on about pancakes. Adrian stood there for a long time. "That's a hell of an ask," he said finally. "I know. You don't fight fair." "No," Sophia agreed. "I never have. It's most of why I'm successful, and most of why I'm alone. I'm working on it. Today's day one." She waited. "You don't have to answer now. You've got a daughter to feed pancakes to. Take a week. Take a month. The offer doesn't expire." Adrian looked over at Emma, laughing, holding Rosa's hand alive and whole and safe. Because 6 years ago, a man decided that showing up for her mattered more than the sky. And he looked back at the airplane he'd flown twice today, the airplane that had reminded him of the thing he'd buried. And he thought about Vance, who read every page of every manual, who died in the half-second. Adrian looked away, whose death had quietly saved pilots neither of them would ever meet. "I've got conditions," he heard himself say. Sophia went very still. "You're not saying no. I'm saying I've got conditions." Adrian's jaw was set now, and there was something in his face that Sophia hadn't seen yet. Not the mechanic, not even the pilot, but something older and harder underneath both, the part of him that had once run test programs and made life and death calls for a living. "Because if I do this, I'm not doing the fake version, and I'm not doing the version where I take the title and you overrule me the first time safety costs you money. I've watched 100 safety programs die that exact death. So if I do this, we do it my way, and my way is not comfortable for people like you." "Name them," Sophia said. "The conditions, all of them." And Adrian Cole in his grease-stained coveralls on a windy ramp at the end of the strangest day of his life, with his daughter laughing 30 feet away and a dead friend's memory sitting quiet in his chest, looked the billionaire dead in the eye. The same way he'd looked at her that morning when she threw the keys at his feet and began for the first time in 6 years to step back into the life he'd walked away from. Not because she'd baited him, not to prove anything to anyone, but because a man who read every page of every manual had died in the half-second the world looked away, and Adrian Cole had just been handed a chance to make sure it meant that fewer people ever would. "First condition," he said. "When a mechanic says an airplane doesn't fly, it doesn't fly. Not me, not you, not a customer, not a senator. Nobody overrules the person holding the wrench. That's not a policy. That's the foundation. Everything else sits on top of it." He held her eyes. "You want to hear the rest? I want to hear all of it," Sophia said. Every word. And she meant it. And they both knew she meant it. And that more than anything else that had happened on that impossible day was the thing that had actually changed. He gave her the rest of the conditions right there on the ramp, and it took 20 minutes, and Emma ate a granola bar Rosa found in her purse, while her father laid down the terms of a life he'd sworn he'd never go back to. Mechanics could stop any aircraft any time, and nobody could overrule them. Pilots could refuse any flight for safety without a single mark against their record ever. No executive, not Sophia, not anyone could override a technical judgment for a business reason. Every safety concern got a written answer within 72 hours, signed by a name, so nobody could hide behind a committee. And the pay for the people at the bottom, the mechanics and the line crews, and the people who fixed the things nobody signed off on, went up because Adrian had lived on a mechanic's wage for 6 years, and he knew to the dollar what it cost a man to raise a kid on it. Sophia said yes to every single one. She didn't negotiate. She didn't counter. She stood there in her $40,000 suit in the cold ramp wind and said yes, 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 and when he finished she said, "Is that all of them?" "That's all of them." "Then we have a deal." She put out her hand. "Captain Cole, come run my flight safety program, and God help anyone who tries to overrule you." Adrian looked at her hand for a second, and then he took it. And that was it. That was the whole thing. A handshake on a windy ramp between a woman who'd called him a wrench that morning and a man who'd let the whole world call him nothing for 6 years. No contract yet, no paperwork, just a grip and two people who'd learned in one impossible afternoon exactly what the other one was made of. I start Monday, Adrian said. But tonight I make pancakes for dinner. Because I promised. You make the pancakes, Sophia said. The paperwork can wait for a man who keeps his promises. He scooped Emma up, and Rosa gathered her things, and Sophia stood at the bottom of the air stairs and watched the black car pull away with a father and a daughter in the back, and for a long moment she didn't move. Rachel Kim came down the stairs and stood beside her. You really gave him all of it, Rachel said. The authority, the override, all of it. I gave him all of it. That's going to make your life harder. I know, Sophia said. She watched the taillights disappear toward the gate. That's how I know it was the right thing. The right thing almost always makes your life harder. That's how you can tell it apart from the easy thing, which is the one I've been picking for 20 years. She turned to Rachel. You flew right seat behind him today. Both legs. You watched him closer than anyone. I did. Tell me honest, is he the real thing? Or did I just get emotional and hire a ghost story? Rachel thought about it. She thought about the walk around the pitot tubes he'd checked by feel the trim he'd read off the tail from 30 feet. The landings so soft the passengers couldn't feel them. The way he'd invited her to catch him in a mistake over and over until she understood it wasn't humility, it was doctrine. Ms. Whitmore. Rachel said, I've flown behind good pilots, and I've flown behind great ones. That man isn't either. He's the thing they're all trying to be when they grow up. She paused. You didn't hire a ghost story. You hired the best decision you'll ever make. Just try not to overrule him. He'll walk. Men like that always walk, and they never come back. I know, Sophia said quietly. I already watched him walk away from more than I'm offering. He walked away from a command. I'm not going to be the reason he walks again. She looked up at the airplane, dark now against the last of the light. I spent 20 years thinking the people at the top held the company up. I watched a mechanic fly that jet better than anyone I employ, and I understood I had it exactly backwards. The people at the top don't hold the company up. The people at the bottom hold the company up. The people at the top just get to decide whether to notice. That was the last thing she said on the ramp. Then she went to her car, and the airplane went quiet, and the strangest day of Sophia Whitmore's life came to an end. The pancakes were, by Emma's official ruling, the best her father had ever made. They ate them at 9 o'clock at night at the kitchen table, syrup everywhere. Emma still in her purple coat, because she refused to take it off, still talking a mile a minute about the airplane, about how big it was, about how Ms. Alvarez said Daddy went all the way to Portland and back in one day. And Adrian sat across from his daughter and ate pancakes for dinner and listened to her, really listened the way he'd promised himself he always would. And somewhere in the middle of it, he had to get up and turn toward the sink for a second, because the whole day had finally caught up with him, and he didn't want Emma to see her father cry over pancakes. But she saw. She always saw everything. Daddy, are you sad? Adrian wiped his eyes and turned around and crouched down by her chair. No, baby, he said. I'm not sad. I promise. I'm the opposite of sad. He searched for how to say it to an 8-year-old. You know how sometimes you're so happy that it kind of feels like crying, because there's too much of it to fit inside. Emma nodded very seriously. Like on my birthday when everyone came. Exactly like that. That's exactly it. He tucked a strand of hair behind her ear. Today Daddy did something he thought he could never do again. Something he was scared of for a really long time. And it turned out okay. It turned out better than okay. And it's a lot of happy to fit inside all at once. What were you scared of? Adrian looked at his daughter, and he thought about the honest answer because that was the deal. A long time ago, he said. Before you were born, Daddy had a friend. His name was Vance. He was a pilot too. The best pilot I ever knew. And one day, something happened, and Vance didn't come home. He said it gently, carefully, the amount an 8-year-old could hold. And for a long time after that, Daddy was too sad and too scared to fly anymore. So I stopped. I fixed airplanes instead of flying them because fixing them didn't scare me, and I could still be near them, And that was enough. Emma's face had gone soft and grave in the way of children hearing something true. Was it because of the sad thing that you stopped? It was because of the sad thing. But you flew today. I flew today. Was Vance still your friend when you flew today? Even though he didn't come home? And Adrian Cole, who had spent 6 years unable to speak this man's name, who had told the whole story for the first time that afternoon. In the back of a stranger's car, knelt on his kitchen floor at 9:30 at night, and got the last piece of it. The piece even the Deputy Secretary of Defense hadn't been able to give him from his 8-year-old daughter in a purple coat. "Yeah, baby," he said, and his voice broke, and this time he didn't try to hide it. "Yeah. He was still my friend when I flew today. He was my friend the whole time. That's exactly right. He was with me the whole time." Emma nodded, satisfied the way kids are satisfied when the world makes sense again, and she went back to her pancakes. And Adrian knelt there on the floor and understood that for 6 years he'd had it wrong. He'd thought that flying again would be a betrayal of Vance, that climbing back into the sky meant leaving his friend behind on the ground. But an 8-year-old had just handed him the truth so simply that he'd missed it for 6 years. You don't leave people behind by living. You carry them. Vance hadn't been waiting on the ground for Adrian to stay grounded with him. Vance had been up there the whole time in the flat, calm voice Adrian used on the radio, in the walk-around he did by feel, in the way he'd invited Rachel to catch him in a mistake. A good landing is a conversation, not a command. Every good thing Adrian did in an airplane, he did with Vance's hands still guiding his. Staying on the ground hadn't kept faith with his friend. It had buried him twice. Flying again was the first time in 6 years Adrian had let him breathe. He got up off the floor. He wiped his face. He sat back down across from his daughter and finished his pancakes, and it was without any competition at all the best meal of his entire life. Monday morning, Adrian Cole walked into Whitmore Aerospace headquarters in a collared shirt with no grease on it, and it felt stranger than the cockpit had. The building was glass and steel, and the kind of quiet that money buys, and people looked at him in the elevator. The way people had always looked at him, trying to place him, filing him, deciding in half a second how much he mattered. Except now there was a badge on his chest that said Director of Flight Safety. And the half-second decision people made changed. And Adrian noticed the change, and he did not like how much he noticed it. He'd been invisible for 6 years. He knew exactly what it felt like to be filed under nobody. And he made himself a private promise standing in that elevator that he would never once in this new job look at a person the way Sophia Whitmore had looked at him that first morning. He kept that promise. It turned out to be the most important thing he did, because the first thing Adrian did before he moved into the office they'd given him, before he read a single report, before he sat through one meeting, was go down to the hangars. Not the executive hangars, the maintenance floors. The places where the actual airplanes got fixed by the actual people, the places that looked exactly like the place he'd worked 4 days earlier. And he walked in his collared shirt with his director's badge, and the mechanics looked up at him, the way mechanics look at management. Wary closed, already deciding he was another suit who'd come to tell them they were working too slow. And Adrian picked up a wrench. He didn't make a speech. He didn't call a meeting. He walked over to a citation that was down for a hydraulic issue, and he read the squawk, and he said to the tech standing there, "Number 2 fitting." And the tech blinked and said, "Yeah, how'd you?" And Adrian said, "I had one weep on me last week on a different airframe. Show me what you're seeing." And he got down on the ground in his director's clothes under the airplane next to the mechanic, and he looked. By the end of the first week, every mechanic on the floor knew that the new director of flight safety had been one of them 4 days ago, that he'd crawled under airplanes for a mechanic's wage, that he knew what a weep at a hydraulic fitting looked like and could find one faster than they could. And by the end of the first month, they knew something more important than that when Adrian Cole said a mechanic could stop any airplane and nobody could overrule them, he meant it, because the first time a scheduler tried to pressure a tech into signing off on a marginal aircraft to hit a delivery deadline. Adrian grounded the airplane himself, wrote up the scheduler, and sent a memo to all 11,000 employees with the scheduler's name in it and one sentence underneath. We do not pressure people to sign off on aircraft they don't trust. Not here, not ever. Not for any customer, any deadline, or any dollar. Sophia signed the memo without changing a word. That was the test, and they both knew it was the test. A scheduler with a relationship to a major customer, a deadline worth real money, and a memo that named him in front of the whole company. The old Sophia. The Sophia from 4 weeks ago would have quietly softened. It protected the relationship, found a way to make the problem go away without anyone important being embarrassed. This Sophia read the memo and read it again and picked up the phone and called Adrian. "You named him," she said. "I named him. He's got a relationship with our biggest customer. Then our biggest customer is going to learn how we do things," Adrian said. "You want to overrule me, Ms. Whitmore? This is the moment. This is exactly the moment. First real test, real money on the line, real relationship at stake. If you're going to fold, fold now, and I'll clean out my office this afternoon, and no hard feelings, because at least you'll have shown me who you are before I got in too deep." He wasn't angry. He was just clear the way he was always clear. "So, do I send the memo or do I clean out my office?" There was a long silence on the phone. "Send the memo," Sophia said. "And Adrian, thank you for making me pass the test. I needed to know I could. I wasn't sure until right now." He sent the memo. The scheduler was furious. The customer called Sophia personally, and Sophia told the customer in the calm, flat voice she'd learned from listening to a mechanic run a cockpit that Whitmore Aerospace's safety culture was not negotiable, and that if that was a problem, there were other companies who'd cut the corner, and the customer was welcome to go find one. The customer stayed. The customer stayed because it turned out what customers actually want when they're buying airplanes is not the company that'll cut a corner for them. It's the company that won't cut a corner for anyone, including them, because that's the company whose airplanes don't fall out of the sky. Whitmore's safety record, already the best in the industry, got better. Not because of graphs, because of a man who'd picked up a wrench on his first day and never let anyone forget that the people holding the wrenches were the ones keeping everyone alive. The months went by. Adrian flew again, not as a job, but sometimes when a test flight needed a pilot who understood exactly what he was risking when the company was certifying something new, and the people strapping in wanted a safety director who wouldn't ask them to do anything. He wouldn't do himself. He never made a big thing of it. He'd just show up on the flight line in a flight suit instead of a collared shirt, and the test pilots would go quiet because word had gotten around by then about who he'd been. And there is no respect in aviation quite like the respect test pilots have for one of their own who came back. And on one of those flights, months into the job, Adrian sat in the cockpit of a new aircraft that his own company had built, an aircraft going up to explore a corner of the envelope nobody had been to. Yet the exact kind of flight that had killed Vance, and he ran the checklist, and he cross-checked every item with the co-pilot beside him, and he invited her the way he always invited them to catch him in a mistake. And when the aircraft lifted off and climbed into a clear sky, Adrian Cole did not feel the old fear. He felt Vance. He felt him in the calm, in the preparation, in the 100 small, correct things that a man who read every page of every manual had taught a man who used to fly on feel. And when they hit the test point and everything held together, when the airframe did exactly what the engineers predicted, because the protocols were better now, because of the changes that came out of the worst day of Adrian's life. Adrian keyed the radio, and in the flat, calm voice he'd carried for 20 years, he called out the numbers, and he brought the airplane home. He landed it soft, the way Vance taught him. A conversation, not a command. And in the passenger cabin of that flight watching was Sophia Whitmore, because she flew on the test flights now, all of them strapped into the jump seat. Nobody important ever used, because she'd decided that if the people who built her airplanes were willing to risk their lives finding out whether they'd hold together, then the least the CEO could do was be in the airplane with them. She'd never done it before. She did it every time now. It was, she said, the single most important change she'd made in 20 years of running the company. Not a policy, not a memo, just the simple act of being in the airplane, close enough to hear it, close enough to know what her industry cost. The people who flew it. That evening after the test flight, Adrian brought Emma to the airfield. She was 9 now. She'd asked, and finally he'd said yes, and he walked her out onto the flight line in the gold evening light and stood her in front of the aircraft he'd flown that day. "This is what Daddy does now," he said. Emma looked up at it, enormous and gleaming, and then she looked at her father, and she said the thing that no medal and no title and no Deputy Secretary of Defense had ever quite said to him. "Are you not scared anymore?" Adrian crouched down beside his daughter at her level, the way you do when you're telling a child something true. "I'm still scared sometimes, baby," he said. "That never goes all the way away, and it shouldn't. A person who's not scared at all up there is a person who's going to get somebody hurt. But you know what I learned?" "What?" "I learned that being scared and doing it anyway, that's not two different things. That's the same thing. That's what brave actually is. Brave isn't not being scared. Brave is being scared and showing up anyway." He tucked the strand of hair behind her ear, the way he'd done 10,000 times. "You taught me that. You didn't even know you taught me that. Every morning for 6 years when your mom was gone and I didn't want to get out of bed, I got up anyway. Because you needed breakfast. And it turned out that getting up when you don't want to, that's the whole secret. That's flying. That's everything. You just keep showing up." Emma leaned against him, and the two of them stood on the flight line in the last of the gold light, a father and a daughter and an airplane. And behind them, at a respectful distance, Sophia Whitmore watched and did not intrude, because she'd learned that too, when to speak and when to stand back and let a moment be what it was. She thought about the morning it all started. The hangar. The keys she'd thrown at his feet. The word she'd used, wrench, and the laughter she'd conducted like an orchestra. She thought about how certain she'd been, how completely and totally certain that she'd known exactly who that man was the second she saw his boots. And she thought about everything that certainty had almost cost her. Not the money, not the contract, the chance to know him, the chance to be changed by him, the chance to become in the space of a single impossible afternoon, and the year that followed a person she could actually stand to be. The greatest lesson of her life had been standing under an airplane in dirty coveralls holding a wrench waiting for someone to look past the grease long enough to see him. And she had almost walked right by. Adrian Cole had been a man the world looked through. A mechanic nobody respected. A widower cutting the crusts off peanut butter sandwiches at 4:45 in the morning. A pilot who'd buried himself alive on the ground because the last two things he loved had come apart at altitude. The world had filed him under nobody and moved on over and over for years, and Adrian had let it because being nobody was quiet, and quiet was safe, and safe was all he'd wanted after everything he'd lost. But the sky had waited for him. The sky always waits for the rare ones, the ones built for it down in the marrow, and it had waited 6 patient years for Adrian Cole. And then one morning a woman in a nice suit threw a set of keys at his feet and told him to fly, and the sky finally got him back. And he had flown. God, how he had flown. He had flown as a father and a widower and a grieving friend and a decorated pilot, all at once flown for a little girl braver than she knew, flown with a dead man's hands guiding his own flown home soft and true through a golden evening to a daughter waiting on the ramp in a purple coat. He had picked up the keys the whole world watched a billionaire throw at his feet, and he had used them to unlock the one door he'd sworn was shut forever. And on the other side of that door, he had found not the man he used to be, but the man he was always meant to become. A person's worth is not the clothes on his back, or the badge on his chest, or the place where the world decides to file him. Sometimes the person standing beneath the aircraft covered in grease, invisible to everyone who matters, is the only one in the entire building who knows exactly how to make it fly. Sophia Whitmore learned that on the strangest day of her life, and she spent every day after it making sure she never forgot. And Adrian Cole, the mechanic, the pilot, the father who never once broke a promise. Adrian Cole never let the world make him invisible again. He had fallen, and he had healed, and he had come home to the sky. And this time, he came home to stay.